to the neighborhood if the parking was available and snow emergencies overnight, or if people can use the spots for valet for other businesses when you're not operating. I would assume that bank is open till what, 5?
6 Monday through Friday.
What happens after 6 o'clock and on Saturdays and Sundays?
Nothing at this point. But
Why?
We had a meeting with the Echo board, and they asked that same question, and we were open to discussing the possibilities of evening parking and
Weekends?
and so forth. Correct. Yep.
So, Madam Chair, I'm not going to support the request unless that's a condition of it. This happens in my ward downtown all the time, where you make the argument you need a lot of parking for your employees for the hours you're open, but if you're not, then if there's an empty surface parking lot sitting there with all of this great need in Uptown on weekends and at nights, then it's just a blight, in my opinion. So I'm not the this is not my word, but I'm not going to support the request unless a condition is added that they work out something to use that parking at nights or weekends. I don't actually think you should be building a one-story building in this location. So, I mean, I'm way on the other side of where you guys are at.
Well, yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Would anyone else like to speak before I close the public hearing? Anyone else? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. We have lots of comments and questions from council members. Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that I completely agree with Councilmember Goodman, and having previously worked a lot on Lake Street projects, it's just, it needs density. It needs more than one story, and there's way too much surface parking just in general. So thank you.
Kimberly, do you happen to know the FAR offhand? Because that's the real problem here. And I think perhaps I should have encouraged the neighborhood board to add more context to their letter. When Ben and I go monthly to the meetings, which we do, the conversation there has really been about how do we get this project to totally change into a different form that's not a single story building surrounded by surface parking. And I really have appreciated how much Wells Fargo has been responsive to the design concerns that the Planning Commission and the neighborhood had expressed. It's come leaps and bounds, but I think the real problem here is it's a single story building surrounded by something. And I think the neighborhood organization, at least I don't want to speak for them, but in my conversations with board members and others, the sort of question has been, well, if it's going to be surrounded by something, maybe it might as well be parking. I think that was sort of their feeling. But I think the real problem is we don't have FAR standards that require something more than what they have. So anyway, that's kind of getting off track, but I just wanted to give some context to the neighborhood's position on the parking. And again, but the legal question we're really asking is, do they meet the standards for the variance for asking for more parking?
To answer your original question, this is a 4,500 square foot building on a site that's just under an acre for an FAR of 0.1. So in some of our pedestrian-oriented overlay districts, we do require a minimum FAR of 1.0. That's not the case in this particular pedestrian-oriented overlay district. That's something we've had a lot of conversation about. Certainly
Let's do that.
Do not disagree with you that we would like to see more density here. Unfortunately, in this case, there was nothing that required them to build a two-story building.
Thank you. That's helpful. Was there any other questions or comments from council members? Is it possible to add that condition? It seems.
Madam Chair, you're referring to Councilmember Goodman's. Yes, I think it would be. You could apply to, if the committee is inclined to approve the variance to either 36 or 25 spaces based on the revised proposal, you could attach it to that approval.
And if I could just clarify, we'll just have to make sure the condition reads something about shared parking and making that parking free so it doesn't become a commercial parking lot and then we have other applications that would be required. So as long as it's some sort of shared parking arrangement, that's...
What is the maximum allowed parking?
The maximum allowed is 17.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I want to make it clear that when we say shared, we don't mean let's put a price on it for games at $7 a turn and that everyone's coming in. I mean an agreement with a restaurant or a coffee shop in the area that has parking needs that can share it through valet, even if they have to pay a fee. It wouldn't be a Class A commercial licensed parking lot. If there's going to be parking in this location, it needs to be available. I think about the people who have to park their cars on the streets on Humboldt during snow emergencies. Where do they go? maybe there's a way it can be a snow emergency lot like we see downtown as well. So I think that if we're going to do it, we better make sure it's an actual benefit to the community and there's a community benefit provided. Otherwise, it's not worth doing.
I have to say, I'm inclined to move to deny the variance completely. I really have struggle finding the support to allow them to exceed the maximum in this pedestrian overlay district. So I'm going to move to deny the variance. Council President.
Madam Chair, I'd offer a substitute to approve the variance with the language that Mr. Nielsen suggested. And Madam Chair, if I could just speak to it for a second, I'm compelled by the neighborhood argument that when you have an existing use and you know how many people are going to park there, those people will be parking in front of people's houses, and that is neighborhood. Far be it for me to try and intrude in somebody's ward, but it's clear this is a neighborhood. I've been out there trying to shop, and parking is a huge issue. So I think it's again this push to try to force people to use particular kinds of transportation is getting to the point that people have had it up to their eyeballs. So that's my motion. It does include the shared parking. It does.
If we consider that alternative, I would encourage us to go with the alternative proposal of 25 spaces, which the applicant has brought forward.
That'd be fine, Madam Chair.
Okay. So then Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would hope that procedurally that we would understand that the agreement would be, the basic outline of the agreement would be reviewable by the full council meeting. And if it weren't in place, that they would expect that we would deny that council, that we would have a written outline of the agreement, which is to put staff and the applicant on notice that we would want that in place in time for review.
Thank you, Councilmember Reich. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Okay. So, I think the overall context here, I think, is important to understand, which is that there is an adopted small area plan that had the support of the community, including the neighborhood organization, which called for density here. And that's why there's a pedestrian overlay district in place with the very loose, frankly, regulations that encourage walkable urban, the walkable urban form that the community requested through the small area plan. Given the context here, what will the space be used for if it's not used for parking? I think that is an important question for us to consider. And so I'm willing to support this compromise here with the 25 spaces as long as they are accessible to others. I still think over time we're not honoring the community's desire to move toward a more walkable uptown area, but really that has more to do with our lacking in the FAR regulations, I think, than the parking regulations in this case. So, Kimberly, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to seek clarification on Councilmember Reich's points. Are you looking for, if Councilmember Johnson's motion were to be approved, an actual shared parking agreement with a specific user, or just a general commitment from Wells Fargo that they would allow for shared parking on the site?
Madam Chair, I would say that the latter would be appropriate.
Okay, great.
Okay, so just to clarify, we have a motion from Council President Johnson that to approve the variance for 25 parking spaces total, with the condition added that there be a written statement that there be a shared parking agreement with some future neighborhood entity. Does that sound right? Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. Thank you.
Madam Chair, there's just a second part of that. You also want to make a motion on the site plan review condition. There was condition number 3, limited it to 17 stalls as well.
Thank you. Mr. Nielsen. So on item number 2, I will move, so it would be, so we want to increase the number to 25 in that statement. So we would approve the condition subject to changing it to 25.
Correct. Yep. You'd move to grant the appeal and modify that condition to reflect the revised proposal of 25 spaces.
Thank you, Mr. Nielsen. So I will move to modify condition of approval number 3 to allow for 25 parking stalls. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. That concludes item 2, and then that will move us to item number 3, which is 112 East Hennepin Avenue. And this is a discussion, just so everyone is clear, of conditions of approval that have come through the Heritage Preservation Commission. This hasn't been to the CPC.
Good morning, Chair Bender, members of the committee. This is an appeal of the Heritage Preservation Commission's actions from December 1st for the property at 112 East Hennepin Avenue. So some background, the property is located in the Nicollet Island East Bank neighborhood. It's located in the St. Anthony Falls Historic District, which has been designated since 1971. You're probably familiar with the site. It's the current location of the Nye's restaurant. The site is 4 separate buildings and then a large surface parking lot. Currently, there's 2 historic buildings, as you can see, and then 2 one-story buildings that were built in the 1960s that exist today. This is what Hennepin Avenue looked like when you were crossing the river in 1912. So you can see the 2 historic buildings identified on the right. There aren't a ton of historic photos of these properties. Here's some pictures of what the property looked like in 1967. So the applicants, or the applications that went before the Heritage Preservation Commission were 2 certificates of appropriateness. So the first certificate of appropriateness was to allow the demolition of those 2 one-story buildings, which are non-contributing resources in the St. Anthony Falls Historic District. The second certificate of appropriateness was to allow exterior changes to the remaining historic buildings, and then to allow a new 6-story building to be constructed, which would be attached to those historic buildings. So the HPC action on that first certificate of appropriateness, they voted 10-0 to approve the C of A to allow the demolition of those 2 one-story structures. And then the action on the second certificate of appropriateness was 6-4 to approve the C of A for the exterior alterations in the new construction, subject to 10 separate conditions of approval. Staff had originally recommended 12. The HPC struck 2 of those recommended conditions of approval, but the remainder of the conditions of approval were originally recommended by staff and adopted by the HPC. The applicant is only appealing 4 of the conditions, so those are the ones with the arrows next to them. So we'll just focus on those today. So this is an image of the proposal. So it's essentially 4 to 6 stories of new construction. It's a mixed-use project with 71 dwelling units. There would be retail all along Hennepin. There would be 1 level of underground parking and then a level of parking at the rear on the ground level. There would be parking at the rear. The residential entrance would be on 2nd Street, and then there would be retail entrances all along Hennepin Avenue. So those conditions of approval that were recommended and that are being appealed today were all based upon the St. Anthony Falls Historic District Design Guidelines, which were adopted in 2012. So I'll go through each one of the 4. So the first one is related to building equipment. The design guideline that was adopted says that projects should minimize the visual impacts of their building equipment as seen from the public way, and specifically that primary wall penetrations for HVAC equipment are not permitted and should not be located on a primary facade. The proposal includes individual HVAC units, which are kind of typically called Magic Packs, but that's just a brand. So they're proposing Magic Packs on all 3 primary facades of the new construction. So the Hennepin Avenue facade, you can see them circled. The Lourdes Place facade, again circled, and the 2nd Street facade. And because that's a very specific condition of approval, staff recommended and the HPC adopted a condition of approval that the HVAC penetration should not be located on elevations facing a public street. because there are two historic buildings, a new infill building that they're proposing, and then the larger 6-story building. There's a lot going on the site, and there's, by minimizing the HVAC units, that's one less thing that's cluttering the facades of the buildings. Also, just for example, these HVAC units are used pretty typically in these type of apartment or mixed-use 4 to 6-story buildings. Just an example of how they look when they're actually constructed. There's some around town. And then just going back to that specific guideline, in their appeal statement, the applicant asserts that because these HVAC units have been approved for other projects, and they have been approved for other projects, specifically in the St. Anthony Falls Historic District, that they, in order to be consistent, that they should be approved for this project as well. And I just want to remind you that guidelines are guidelines, and they're intended to be applied on a case-by-case basis. And the fact that they are approved for one project, every site is different, and it doesn't mean that they have to be approved on every project. The next subject was, or the next condition of approval was related to roof decks. And so the design guideline that was adopted says that projects should minimize the impact of roof decks as seen from the street. And the way to do that is to typically set back the guardrails for a roof deck at least one structural bay or 15 feet. The applicants had originally proposed, so there's a kind of amenity roof deck that's on top of the harness shop building, the historic building in the center, which would be accessible to all of the tenants of the building. And then there's a private roof deck on the newer infill metal panel portion to the right of that. They had originally proposed both of those to be set back at 8 feet. When they brought it to the HPC meeting, they had changed it. And then in the appeal document, they are showing pulling the roof deck all the way to the front of the harness shop building, so no setback, and then pushing back the one on the newer building. Because that's a very specific design guideline, staff recommended and the HPC adopted a condition of approval that all roof deck railings shall be set back at least 15 feet from the building edge along the street to minimize the visual impact of the roof deck. It should be noted, and maybe the applicant can speak to it more, that they're hoping to be able to use the parapet of the building as a railing. There are building code requirements associated with that, so there's a chance that they wouldn't actually need a railing. But if they don't need the railing, that condition of approval still being in place would, they could still place the roof deck all the way up to the front of the building if they can use the parapet as the railing. If that makes sense. Next up is materials. So the design guideline shown here says that building materials should be essentially similar in scale, color, and texture to those that were historically in place in the historic context of the historic district, and that a facade facing a public street should have just one principal material and then a few accent materials. Staff found that the applicants proposing on a majority of the new construction, this 6th floor addition, to be this champagne-colored metal panel, where the rest of the new construction is essentially 2 different colors of brick, and then the historic buildings are 2 other colors of brick. So staff found that historically a building would never have had the top floor of a building would never have been a completely different material from the rest of the building. And so because that didn't exist historically, staff found that if the metal panel was darker, maybe to match the brick, or if they brought the brick all the way up to the 6th floor, that would be more in keeping with the historic character of the area. And then finally, the 4th condition is related. This is the interior side of the property, or the new proposal, which faces the Our Lady of Lourdes Church and Rectory building. And on this side, they're proposing at the ground level, well, in their application packet, they proposed burnished block, concrete block. They've since updated that, and they're now proposing it to be precast concrete. But staff found that that's introducing an entirely new material to this side of the building. They do rack the brick a little bit around the corners, but because it's adding essentially a new principal material that doesn't match the other sides of the building, staff recommended that a condition of approval, and the HPC adopted that condition of approval, that the concrete block, or precast concrete, I suppose, proposed would be replaced with brick that would match the floors above. I would also note that this is a large blank wall, which is going to become an issue when they come forward for land use applications and site plan review. So that will also need to be addressed at Planning Commission. As far as public comments,
Ms. Turner, can I clarify that those were then a certificate of appropriateness items 4, 5, 9, and 10?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The presentation has the numbers from the original HPC hearing, but correct. It's 4, 5, 9, and 10. Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah, it got renumbered once they struck a couple.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks.
So yeah, just a couple more things. No public comments were received for the HPC hearing, but 2 public comments were received for this appeal, which should be in your packet. One was a neighbor who was concerned about the proposed materials, and the second was a representative of the Our Lady of Lourdes Church who said that they had no objection to the appeal. And so I'll just leave those 4 conditions of approval up on the screen and take any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, we will open the public hearing. We can start with the applicant and then take comment from there.
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Rosseth with ESG Architects. I'm here with Schaefer Richardson, Amy Lucas, the historical consultant, and Carol Lansing, the attorney helping us on this project. We're all here for questions, but I'm going to give a very brief presentation on in a consolidated version of what you have in your packages. The preservation of the buildings at 112 and 116 East Hennepin is made possible through the redevelopment of this whole site. We've taken a lot of care to preserve and thoughtfully build around these buildings to create a project that honors the historic character of the district while creating a vibrant community that adds life and character to the neighborhood. There are 4 of the 10 conditions we seek to strike from the certificate of appropriateness. One of those we are willing to withdraw from the application, which would be item 4, or excuse me, condition 10. The owners agreed that brick would be appropriate in that area. So we'd like to talk about conditions 4, 5, and 9 briefly. The Magic Packs, we've made a major effort to minimize the impact, moving all of the Magic Packs as much as possible off of Hennepin Avenue facade, the primary facade, and where feasible, or where we needed to put them in because of certain unit plans, we've tried to blend them into the adjacent materials where they're painted the same color. We have a number of examples that have been approved by the HPC in the past in other buildings in historic districts throughout the city of Minneapolis. Figure 1 and Figure 2 is Mill and Main, and both of those projects have Magic Packs on all 4 facades of the buildings. And one of the things to note here is this project is directly adjacent to a national landmark as well. Another project that has recently been approved by HPC with Magic Packs is 100 Hennepin. You can see in this where a very similar approach that we've taken on this project, where the grills are painted to match the adjacent material. On the lower portion, the brick material with the grills painted to match as best as possible, and then the metal panel on top, a similar approach. Another project at Dock Street that was approved by the HPC with Magic Packs on primary facades. And again, the same strategy was used to blend it in with the overall color. And to the right, North 4th Avenue facade, the Paxson building. So before I go to number 5, we just simply request that the city demonstrates consistency in administration of the historic district guidelines. These other projects have been approved, and we believe that we're using the very similar strategies that we've done in the past for those projects that were approved. Condition number 5, roof deck setback. We're proposing to place the roof deck at the edge and treat an existing guardrail, if possible, as the railing. We asked for this to be struck, and the goal is to use this parapet as the guardrail. There's a significant amount of restructuring that we have to do, so we ask for leniency in this to be open. If we have to add a small guardrail, that we will minimize the impact of that as much as possible. This just to communicate that there's other examples that national parks and state preservation organizations throughout the country have approved this. The example on the right is a hotel in, in Virginia that was approved with the guardrail and a rooftop deck going to the edge. And recently, the Pioneer Endicott building in St. Paul also was approved through SHPO and national parks. One of the reasons we want to pull this to the edge is we think that having activity that is in the building outside is a really cool way to sort of interact with the pedestrian realm, where people are outside enjoying a rooftop deck, and it just creates more eyes on the street. And we believe it's a really good pedestrian sort of connection that interacts with the building. This is a floor plan of where you see that. Condition 9, we've utilized a strategy that is in the guidelines of a base, middle, and a top. We believe that this color is appropriate. It's a champagne-colored metal that is playing off the brick color that we have below. We think that this is subjective, but we believe that it strongly suggests a very good, clear answer to the base, middle, top, and we believe that it blends in really beautifully with the composition of the rest of the building. With that, we're here for questions.
Are there any questions for the applicant? There are none.
Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and see if anyone else would like to come up and speak. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Councilmember Frye, would you like to make some comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to reflect on the evolution of this project over the last year and a half. This was initially a development consisting of 29 to 30 stories. Obviously, there was quite a bit of pushback from the adjacent church and some surrounding neighborhoods, and the end result has been a beautiful and significant compromise. We're now looking at approximately 6 stories, but this is not just any 6-story stick frame building. It constitutes approximately 5 different buildings, and the overarching goal in the Senhen neighborhood, which of course refers to Central and Hennepin, is to create a collage of historical eras. So we don't need to freeze time at 1890, at 1910, or 1950, or 2005. We can evolve, we can grow, and we can create a diversity of eras, height, and people that make cities really interesting. And you see this all throughout Europe. You see this in New York City. You can have different heights, different facades, types of buildings, and it really makes the area exciting. And the concepts of growth and historic preservation are not mutually exclusive, and this project is really proving it in a great way. So I'm just going to go through all 3 items now, not 4, since the item number 10 has since been taken off. So first, we wanted to maximize the number of eyes on East Hennepin. So when we looked at the harness shop building, which if you look at your screen right now, that's the approximately 3-story building that's got harness shop written across the top of it. The perfect idea was for some form of plaza. Now, if you move the railing back, as was suggested by HPC, then you're not going to get the eyes on the street. You're going to get the eyes on the floor. And that doesn't help very much. So I would strongly urge my colleagues to grant the appeal of Schaefer Richardson on that item so that we can have some additional eyes on the street. The second item, and I'm not sure I'm going in the correct order right now, but the second item is the color. There was an individual as part of the design team that did quite a bit of research to determine what colors would look good with the surrounding area as well as the adjacent buildings, and they determined that the color that you see before you would work quite well. I have infamously bad taste, but I'm obliged to trust those who are paid to do the work rather than a relatively ambiguous request that the color be a little bit darker. And so I would ask that you grant that appeal as well. The third one is related to the Magic Packs. I keep saying jet packs. And the Magic Packs, there is quite a precedent for allowing Magic Packs in developments in historic districts. And given that this development includes approximately 5 different buildings, having central air would likely be cost prohibitive. But apart from the cost prohibition, again, there's a precedent. And I think it just makes sense. So I would ask that you grant that appeal as well. And then the final item, which is number 10, I thank the developer for removing that item because I do think that a brick bottom located just next to the church will, I think, work off of each other and play off of each other very well. So I thank you for removing that one because if you hadn't, I was going to ask my colleagues to not grant the appeal. So all in all,